A few days ago, it was the anniversary of God of War Ragnarok, one of my favourite games of all time and a fantastic gaming experience. The combat, the storytelling, the characters, the spectacle, the OST, all of it was on point, and aside from a couple of small issues I have, I consider the game a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. So imagine my surprise when I recently went onto Twitter, yes it's still Twitter, and I see some bashing of God of War Ragnarok. Ah well, that's nothing new. Comparisons to Elden Ring, criticisms of the Ironwood section, the focus on characters during the Battle of Ragnarok rather than a large-scale war, stuff like that is all worth discussing. But when I take a closer look at the image that the guy used for criticism and it looked something like this, my god-awful take senses started to tingle in a way that they hadn't done since the Under the Mayo video about Arkham Knight. Don't worry my sweet, I'll be coming back for round 2 soon enough. YorchTorch Games is both a Twitter user and a YouTuber with a modest following of around 5,000 people altogether, but it's a fairly passionate and active community. They rally behind his appreciation for retro gaming, his pushing of various indie developers, and his utter obsession with anti-woke messaging. He takes it upon himself to call out DEI and wokeness within games, and even offer solutions to woke game developers so that they can correct their mistakes. He sees himself as a hero. I see him as a man in need of a hobby. He's mainly made an online career out of making mountains out of molehills, like many video game enthusiasts before him, myself included by making these videos. He's even posted a whole manifesto called Never Forget regarding quote-unquote wokeness in gaming and what damage it's done to us. I'm not reading this out loud, but that's what the pause button is for. He's attacked The Last of Us 2, Baldur's Gate 3, and the topic of today's video, God of War Ragnarok. He seems to have quite the grudge against this game if the frequency of his posts are anything to go by. Today I felt like looking at some of these arguments, giving my own counterpoints, and discussing larger issues in gaming as a whole at the end. Real quick, a couple of disclaimers. First of all, please don't go and harass Yorch on my behalf. His account is bigger than mine and I'm not interested in sparking more negativity, I'm just trying to address something I find kind of dumb in hopefully a comedic and maybe even productive way. Second of all, I won't be addressing any of the homophobia, transphobia, or blatant right-wing views that Yorch parrots and endorses. That's a bit too heavy of a topic for me to address in this rather silly video. So, why is God of War Ragnarok a terrible game and the worst one in the franchise? Let's go over this handy image that outlines his feelings. 1. Race-swapped Angrboda. Oh, we're starting with this. I don't know what I can say about this without getting cancelled by one side or the other. Let me just give my personal thoughts on this then. Is this an unnecessary race swap? Well, yes, I suppose so. She's Scandinavian, they weren't really known for being dark of skin. Is this a deal breaker for the game? No, absolutely not. Angrboda's skin tone is never brought up as a talking point in the game. It's not like they're actively using it to push an agenda. It's not even like it's a bad character design, she looks perfectly fine. Angrboda is a solidly written character who plays an important role in the story. In my opinion, this isn't something that should be regarded as the downfall of Western gaming civilization as Yorch seems to think it is, seeing as he specified this point in his big manifesto. I know he'd rather have Angrboda look like this, but that's a point I'll get to later. Number 2. Kratos was nerfed. Oh yes, something I can actually talk about. So this argument goes down a lot, where Kratos from God of War Norse is said to be nerfed compared to Kratos from God of War Greek. Where does this come from? Did you miss the part where he and Baldur split apart an entire landscape just by pushing against each other? Or where he flipped the entire realm temple with relative ease? Is it because of the gameplay, now that there's a level system and RPG mechanics? I get that it can create the illusion of an underpowered Kratos when you encounter enemies that are higher level than you, but that's called gameplay. By this logic, God of War 3 Kratos is weak because he can be killed by basic grunts. We accept these leaps in logic because they are solely the fault of players and are necessary for the gameplay experience. In God of War Ragnarok, Kratos beats Thor, he beats Freya whenever he's not holding back, he puts Garm down before the wolf revives, he beats Heimdall, he carries the fight against Odin, he repeatedly beats Tyr in sparring. Kratos in Ragnarok is every bit as powerful as he ever was, even more so now that he's got the Draupnir Spear and extra Norse magics. The creator even said that Norse Kratos is stronger than Greek Kratos, except perhaps when Kratos was wielding the full power of hope at the end of God of War 3. And this is the same creator that made God of War 2, Cory the Balrog. This argument of a nerfed Kratos is dumb, and I will always respond to it as such, just because he's not sadistically brutalizing every enemy he comes across. As for the second part of this, the deconstructed and depressed part, it's because Kratos is actually experiencing character development, learning to shake off his cynicism, trust others for better or worse. It's not character deconstruction, this is character enhancement. The whole point of these games is Kratos not being the hot-headed, single-minded, vengeance-driven destroyer that he once was, and wanting him to just regress to that state goes against the theme of the Norse games, and even the ending of God of War 3, where Kratos states that his vengeance is over, after seeing and realizing the consequences of his actions and the hollowness of revenge at the cost of everything you hold dear, hence the whole bit in that game with Pandora. And the point about Kratos being depressed, like that's something new to the franchise? The first scene in God of War 1 is him throwing himself off a cliff due to depression. Have you played the franchise? Or do you just want something to be angry about? Number 3. Lamest Odin ever. The worst final boss in the history of gaming. The definition of a beta male. First off, that final boss fight was awesome. Second off, I'll admit, this Odin is not the tall, imposing king that he could have been. He's an old man who looks like he could be your kindly grandpa. That's the point. Odin in this game isn't a hulking warrior like Thor or even Tyr. He's a manipulator, a schemer. He infiltrated the home of the main characters disguised as Tyr very successfully, and used that to learn several key bits of information by playing off the compassion of Atreus, Freya, and even Kratos, only getting revealed due to slip-ups under pressure. He turned Atreus against his father without even having to try very hard. He has Thor on a leash due to his abuse and manipulative tactics during his upbringing, controlling him far more effectively than Zeus ever controlled Kratos, preventing any form of rebellion right up until the end of the game. And if you want to see his feats as a warrior, he killed Ymir, the first giant, and carved an entire realm, Midgard, out of his flesh. He went toe-to-toe with Kratos, Atreus, and Freya. He's a powerful archmage and a capable god king in his own right, ruling over the Nordic pantheon with manipulation, but also with fear. Would it have been cool to see Odin as a tall, imposing, dark king of the gods? Hell yes, I'd have been fine with that. But there's merit in what we got. A ruthless manipulator, willing to sacrifice anything and everything to achieve his goals. Also, he can casually swing Mjolnir. So, calling him objectively lame? I don't think that's a fair perspective. 4. This uglified, annoying female character can't be Thor's daughter. He's talking about Thrud. And to this I say, why not? Uglified? She looks pretty normal to me, as the daughter of the beautiful Sif and the brutish Thor. Something you'll learn about Yorch is that unless a female character looks like an AI-generated hot woman or a model from Blender porn, he'll consider them uglified. I'll get to this point later as well. First off dude, she's a child in this game, like around Atreus' age of 15. Second of all, I never found Thrud annoying. Her arc makes sense regarding her desire to be a warrior. Her actions make sense considering her environment, upbringing, and being under the manipulations of Odin, and she's obviously quite capable in battle. I understand it's not entirely possible with Twitter posts considering the character length, but Yorch never actually explains why he doesn't like anything, or why he thinks the way he does. He only throws around buzzwords and screams woke all the time. It doesn't make for much discussion. 5. Irrelevant soap opera drama. Oh, forgive the game for trying to make things engaging, and succeeding, might I add. The examples he lists are Atreus and Angerboda fighting her grandmother, which I agree is a largely pointless confrontation for the story, but is a creative and fun boss fight, which was sorely needed during the dragged out Ironwood section. Characters sitting around and having uninteresting discussions around a table. That's because God of War Ragnarok introduces something new to the God of War franchise: downtime. In every God of War game before Ragnarok, there's a clear destination, and the whole game is about getting to it. Pandora's Box, the Flame of Olympus, Jotunheim. Whereas Ragnarok actually gives the characters moments to just sit, breathe, plan, and interact while they figure out what to do next, and this further leads into Odin's manipulations. They actually have a hub area in this game, for God's sake. If you're a fan of these characters as characters, you can appreciate this. If you only want to see these characters fight, then you won't be a fan of these sorts of scenes. I'm willing to give this point a pass as personal taste, but it still feels in bad faith. And the final example, dwarves crying and seething. You mean the well-done execution of a genuinely shocking plot twist, the realistic grief of permanently losing a family member, in part due to your own actions, the incredible performance by Adam J. Harrington, one of the most emotional scenes in the game that leads directly into Ragnarok, in a franchise that's all about a man seeking vengeance for his murdered family. Give me a break. Right, that's his talking points pretty thoroughly covered. Largely it's a bunch of contextless whining appealing to common gamer buzzwords, such as uglified and nerfed. Wow, he really does hate this game. I wonder, what would his God of War Ragnarok look like? Don't worry, he's told us about that too. Twice. Here's his first take. Quote, Kratos goes to Norse lands. The Norse gods have a beef with Kratos. What? Who cares? It's Kratos versus Norse gods, and we're there just for the fun of it. Kratos has some action with some Norse beauties. Kratos unleashes hell in Norseland. Ragnarok takes place. Kratos disappears up with some vague conclusion later. That's it. So, this is immediately terrible. I've concluded that Yorch doesn't want deep storytelling or compelling characters, he just wants to bang action figures together and jack off in the meantime. The original Greek God of War games had an awesome story full of lore, background, compelling characters, and deep themes. It was a genuine Greek tragedy. They were about a deeply suffering man pushed to the point of despair and rage by the manipulations of cruel gods and his own mistakes, who eventually resolved to fix what he did in the small way that he still could, and the Norse games are about building on that resolution. The Norse gods have a beef with Kratos. What? Who cares? People that care about stories and games, like you claim to. They care. Even his own audience wasn't a fan of that one. And that third point, Kratos has some action with some Norse beauties. How do you type that and not cringe at yourself? I'll get back to that point in a bit. Here's his second attempt at fixing the game. 1. Remove the race-swapped Angrboda. Whatever dude, if you want to meltdown over it, that's your choice. 2. Focus 100% on Kratos. I can kind of get this point, Kratos is the main character, but it would be kind of hard to do that in Ragnarok after introducing his son as a key character in God of War 4, and Kratos' development is much better for having Atreus with him to bounce off of, but whatever. Add a healthy dose of Norse beauties. Oh, well perhaps he means introduce more of the female Nordic pantheon, so we can have more fun boss battles and see more awesome mythological characters. Nope, he just wants off-screen Kratos sex scenes. This is a very important step. Get over yourself, dude. 4. Replace decrepit Odin with a badass Odin that turns into a colossal, brutal crow. This one I wouldn't have a problem with. I mean, it required them to alter the story and Odin's characterization, but it could have merit. I mean, Odin couldn't turn into animals in the myths except by spiritual projection, and he's associated with ravens, not crows, but at least you tried. Not much better than the first attempt, is it? And yet Yorch has proposed the idea of starting a video game design course, fully completing the Red Pill Grifter cycle, but with a focus on video games. It's point 4 that I'll bring up as the final thing I'm wanting to talk about today. Does he play all his games one-handed? I don't want to throw around the word gooner, because that can be a buzzword used by the overly woke to dismiss legitimate criticism, but it fits here with Yorch. Every Fix-It tweet he makes has add more beautiful female characters for the purpose of sex scenes with the male lead. Case in point, his Fix-It for The Last of Us 2, and believe me, I'd tear this thing apart more if I had the time. Add an organization of hot vixens called the Lonely Widows, just so Joel can have sex. Are you lonely or something? From my understanding, the value of a female character to Yorch is how hot they are in his eyes, and if they are used for sex appeal, and he wants as many of those as possible. Don't get me wrong, I too enjoy beautiful character design. Tifa Lockhart from Final Fantasy VII, Lady from the Devil May Cry series, 2B from Nier Automata, but I appreciate them more for their excellently written character arcs and personalities. The fact that they're hot is just a bonus. Last time I checked, you're playing a video game, not watching porn, but perhaps for a gamer like Yorch, they're one and the same. Now, let me surprise you all. I think Yorch has the occasional good point. His analysis of the Final Fantasy VII marketing was actually pretty good, a surprising hit tweet amongst the muck, showing that he does have some knowledge, he just doesn't often show it because he's too obsessed with hot vixens. And his opinion that gaming is in a bit of a bad state these days isn't 100% incorrect. We live in a time of rushed game releases, mediocre live service projects with overly inflated budgets, needless pandering at the cost of game quality, and a gradual feeling of games becoming more corporate and sanitized rather than passion projects created for the sole purpose of fun. His message of vote with your wallets is actually correct. We as gamers need to show these companies what we are willing to put up with. We should be fighting against games like the Sideways Squad, Harm the Super Friends, and its mandated corporate bullshit and predatory microtransactions. We should be fighting against needless reboots of popular franchises that are bastardized for the modern audience, an audience that apparently isn't buying these games anyways. We should be fighting against idiotic reviews like this one. You play as a magical stone monkey in China fighting demons with a stick. The fuck do you mean it lacks diversity? But I feel like Yorch and his fellows miss the mark. They swing too far to the other side of the pendulum. The idea they seem to push forward is that all games should be the same, but in a different way, with a buff male lead with a stoic personality, and for every female character to be a sex object. In my opinion, that's just a different flavor of the overly woke crowd's desire to make all games their way. There's no appreciation in their demands for the quieter nuances of storytelling and character focus, which is ironic given Yorch's praise of games like Red Dead Redemption or Final Fantasy VII. Like I said, his opinion of God of War, a franchise full of character and quite majestic storytelling, is action figures to be banged together. And that's fine. If that's the kind of game you like, then that's great, more power to you. I enjoy games like that as well. But don't act like games or developers trying to be more than that is some kind of failure on the part of the industry. So what's the message of all this? The point of this video? 1. Anyone who critiques games like Yorch should not be looked up to as a beacon of wisdom. By making ridiculous critiques and suggestions like these, he damages his own credibility. He has knowledge, he just never chooses to use it. 2. Everything needs to be in moderation. Don't prioritize DEI over making an actually good game. That must be your priority as a game developer. I acknowledge that the overly woke crowd and attitude amongst some game developers these days is bad for gaming as a whole. I just don't label everything even slightly progressive as a problem, and I appreciate some diversity in my video games. 3. Acknowledge and celebrate achievements in gaming. Make sure games of notable excellence are heralded as the great things that they are, like Black Myth Wukong, Elden Ring, and Baldur's Gate 3. I am trying to offer you an olive branch, Yorch, but you make it so hard. 4. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill. Let's focus on real issues in gaming, rather than going on screaming rants over pronouns or meltdowns on Twitter about there being a gay character in my video game. Let's try our best to unite under a banner of truce, to rebel against the microtransactions and mistreatment of developers in the gaming industry, to say no to the soulless corporate products of EA and Ubisoft. Let's vote with our wallets, try to cut through the us versus them mentality in the community, and do our part to make gaming great again. And stop posting images like these. How is this not satire?